My name is Suzanne Rivera. I arrived at Brown in 1987 and immediately felt the difference between students of privilege and students like me of very limited means. The differences were apparent as we were moving in, and I observed other students and parents carrying in elaborate stereo systems, televisions, refrigerators, and even computers at a time when they were a real luxury. Differences were also apparent when, before even attending a single class, I and other students on financial aid reported to the RADI to begin our work-study jobs, serving food to our fellow students in the dining hall. But these differences, while obvious, were not the most pernicious. Over time, differences became apparent that would affect the way I saw myself and whether I felt I deserved to be at Brown. Discussions with hallmates about what parents do for a living, differences in spending habits and budgets, and leisure activities were all there. Most importantly, though, it became apparent that there were real differences in the level of social and academic preparation. I spent the fall of my freshman year having a series of experiences that called into sharp relief my differences from most of my classmates. Very few had ever been on public assistance or used food stamps or qualified for free lunch or had utilities cut off for lack of payment. And these were the kinds of experiences I brought with me. Not that I expected to find economic diversity in the Ivy League. I was just not prepared to be hobnobbing with the ultra-rich and children of celebrities and politicians. Perhaps I should have been. Perhaps it was naive of me. But I wasn't sure how to behave. My thinking about these issues were clarified early in the spring semester of my freshman year when someone snuck into Manning Chapel overnight and defaced the portraits of wealthy benefactors by painting one letter over each face, spelling out the question, "Elite, who, us?" This caused a firestorm of debate on campus. As you can imagine, the BDH letters section filled with angry letters from authors all claiming to be shocked and appalled. Many were upset at the message. Others understood the feelings but criticized the method. Some, like me, wondered, why aren't we talking about elitism on campus? A small group, including a chaplain named Flora Kishkegian and the head of the Sarah Doyle Women's Center, Beth Zwick, realized that there were students on campus struggling with money issues who might benefit from a safe place to start talking about these issues. They put an ad in the BDH inviting interested parties to a discussion group, and I went. And about a dozen other students showed up too. It was a real revelation for me. There were all sorts of different people there: rural Midwestern students, urban poverty students, immigrant students, Appalachian students, all sharing the feeling that we didn't fully fit in and that our needs were not entirely being met. The group convened about a half a dozen times before deciding we needed to formalize ourselves into an official student organization which would entitle us to a budget for programming and lend legitimacy to our cause. The newly created organization would be called Students on Financial Aid, for which the acronym was SOFA, and our unofficial motto was "So Far, So Good," which we had put on t-shirts with a picture of a shabby couch on the front. It was kind of a humorous and ironic way of turning on its ear the vague feeling we all shared of inferiority. We met weekly as a support group. The attendance grew and grew to the point that we needed a bigger room to meet in. We also identified several concrete issues that we wanted to take up with the administration. The first was related to computers. At that time, a good number of students had their own Macs. You know, the original ones where the CPU and the tiny screen were in the same box. But these cost way too much for the typical financial aid student, and although there were a few computer labs on campus, they typically closed at 10 or midnight. And that was a real problem for those of us who had jobs. Time for writing papers often came after a nightly shift at the Ivy Room, or, in the case of student athletes, a disproportionate number of whom were on aid, after practice. So we lobbied for two things. The first was to keep a computer lab open overnight, and the second was to make interest-free loans available to financial aid students who wanted to buy their own computers. Emboldened by our success on that front, the next issue that captured our attention was the university's policy of need-aware admissions. It struck us as especially objectionable that the university's policy was to check need first and decide admission later. And we argued the university's non-discrimination policy included happenstance of birth. How else could one classify the socioeconomic status of one's parents other than to call it a happenstance of birth? So within a year or so, the group got political. But we also tried to meet the support needs of our members. For example, over Parents' Weekend, we always had a reception for SOFA parents and SOFA students because we knew that they might feel overwhelmed at the official university events, and also they were not likely to be able to afford the fancy dinners out that were part of the Parents' Weekend tradition for our wealthier classmates. One year we held a Classism Awareness Week. In true Brown tradition, there were speakers, seminars, and even a dance celebration at the end of the week. Another year we worked with Greg Elliott in the Sociology Department to create a GISP called Class Issues in Higher Education. In that course, we actually conducted an original research project to collect data from students about their class experiences at Brown. When I graduated in 1991, I was the commencement orator, and I proudly wore a mortar board decorated with the words, "Need blind now." Of course, the following year, a group of student activists would take over University Hall in protest of the university's need-aware policy. And shortly thereafter, when Ruth Simmons became president, she made need-blind admissions a reality. When I look back on my experience at Brown, I note several really important influences. One was the Third World Center, which was a second home to me. The creation of SOFA was absolutely critical. And perhaps not surprisingly, I ended up marrying the co-founder of SOFA, Michael Householder. Our wedding was performed by Flora Kashkagian, the chaplain who'd introduced us, and it was attended by Beth Zwick, also a member of that first fledgling group that turned into SOFA. Other members of SOFA have become lifelong friends. As alums, I share with all other members of the Brown family an important bond. But as a student on financial aid, I think there's a special connection I have with others who had similar experiences that were forged out of hardship, but also there's a sense of pride because the distance we traveled to get our diplomas became a badge of honor.